The woman behind the icon. She stands alone in a room in the White House. It is late. Perhaps it is midnight. Perhaps later. The silence around her is not peaceful. It is the silence of absence. The silence of a world that has suddenly become empty in ways that she could not have imagined days before. Her hands rest on the surface of a desk. She is still wearing the gloves. White, elegant, perfect. She has not yet removed them. Perhaps she cannot. Perhaps the act of removing them would be an acknowledgement that the day has ended, that what has happened is real, that she must now begin the process of living in a world that has fundamentally changed. The desk is his desk, or rather, it was his desk. The distinction between past and present is confusing now. Everything that was has suddenly become was. The presidency that existed hours ago no longer exists. The life that she was living no longer exists. The future that she had imagined, however complicated, however imperfect, has been replaced with a void. She does not cry, not now, not yet. There will be time for tears later, in private moments when the cameras are not watching, when the nation is not depending on her to perform strength. But in this moment, she is simply still. She is processing. She is attempting to understand how a person continues when the structure of their life has collapsed. Outside this room, the machinery of government is continuing. The transition of power has already occurred. The new president has been sworn in. The world is moving forward because the world must move forward. But in this room, in this moment, time has stopped. This is Jacqueline Kennedy. But more accurately, this is the moment when Jacqueline Kennedy transforms from the woman she was into the woman she will become. This is the moment when the private person and the public symbol begin to separate in ways that will define the rest of her life. This is where her story truly begins. Not in the glamour of Camelot, not in the carefully staged photographs of a beautiful young couple, but in this moment of absolute solitude, when she must decide who she will be in the aftermath of catastrophe. To understand who Jacqueline Kennedy became, we must first understand who she was before the world knew her name. We must understand the girl who was born Jacqueline Lee Bouvier on July 28, 1929, into a world of privilege and expectation, of wealth and social positioning, of careful construction and constant performance. She was born into what appeared to be an ideal American family, wealthy, connected, respected. Her father, John Verneau Bouvier III, was a stockbroker, handsome and charming in the way that certain men of that era were handsome and charming, with an easy confidence that masked deeper instabilities. Her mother, Janet Lee Bouvier, was beautiful, ambitious, and determined that her daughters would marry well, that they would position themselves correctly in the social hierarchies that defined their world. But beneath the surface of this apparently perfect family, there were fractures. Her father was an alcoholic. Her parents' marriage was troubled by infidelity and financial instability. The elegant facade that the family presented to the world was maintained through constant effort, constant performance, constant management of appearances. Jackie learned early what it meant to perform. She learned that what people saw was more important than what was real. She learned that elegance was not simply a matter of taste, but a kind of armor, something you constructed around yourself to protect the vulnerable person within. She learned that being watched was a constant condition of her life, and that the person you presented to the world needed to be carefully curated, carefully managed, carefully controlled. She was an intelligent child, deeply so. She read voraciously. She loved literature, poetry, history, art. She had a natural sophistication that went beyond simple social training. She understood beauty not as decoration, but as something meaningful. Something that could communicate emotions and ideas that words could not quite capture. When her parents divorced, a scandal in the social circles they inhabited, Jackie experienced what many children of divorce experience: the sense that the world is not as stable as it appears, that the structures you depend on can collapse, that the people you love can hurt each other in ways that damage everyone around them. She became more reserved after the divorce, more careful, more controlled in her emotional expressions. She learned to present a face to the world that revealed nothing of the chaos she might be feeling internally. She learned, in other words, to be exactly the kind of woman that the role of First Lady would later require her to be. She attended the best schools. She studied in France, where she fell in love with European culture, with the sophistication and elegance of Parisian life, with a way of being in the world that felt more authentic to her than the American social climbing she had grown up with. She developed an aesthetic sensibility that was both natural and carefully cultivated. She understood that beauty was not frivolous. It was a language, a way of communicating, a way of shaping how people perceived you and the world around you. By the time she returned to America in her early 20s, she had become a particular kind of young woman, educated, cultured, beautiful, sophisticated, and deeply guarded. She had learned to move through social situations with grace while revealing almost nothing of her inner self. She had learned to be both present and absent simultaneously, to be in a room without actually being available. This duality would define her entire life. The public Jackie, elegant, composed, seemingly perfect. And the private Jackie, intelligent, complex, wounded, and desperately protective of the self that existed beneath the performance. She met John F. Kennedy at a dinner party in 1952. She was 22 years old, working as a photographer for a Washington newspaper, living the kind of life that young women of her background were expected to live, waiting essentially for the right marriage that would define the next phase of their existence. He was 35, a congressman from Massachusetts, already marked as someone with political potential, already surrounded by the machinery of ambition and power. He was handsome, not in a conventional way, but in a way that suggested both confidence and vulnerability. He was charming. He was witty. He was, in many ways, exactly the kind of man that someone like Jackie might have been trained to recognize as a suitable match. But there was something else about him, too. There was an intelligence in his conversation that appealed to her. There was a sophistication that went beyond simple social performance. There was a sense that beneath the political persona, there was a real person, complex, wounded in his own ways, driven by forces that he perhaps did not fully understand himself. Their courtship was not simple. He was distracted, often absent, focused on his political career in ways that left little room for genuine emotional intimacy. She was cautious, aware that marrying him would mean entering a world of constant scrutiny, constant performance, constant management of appearances. But there was also attraction. There was the sense that they understood each other in ways that other people might not understand them. They were both performers. They were both conscious of image. They were both people who had learned to construct public selves that bore only partial resemblance to their private realities. When they married in 1953, it was treated as a major social event. The wedding was elaborate, carefully staged, photographed extensively. The images that emerged presented exactly what the public wanted to see. A beautiful young couple, elegant and sophisticated, seemingly perfect in every way. But Jackie, standing in her wedding dress, being photographed from every angle, understood something that most of the people watching did not understand. She was entering into a bargain. She was agreeing to become part of a political machine, to subordinate her own desires and needs to the demands of his ambition, to perform a role that would require constant vigilance and constant self-management. She was aware that he was not faithful. Even during their courtship, there had been indications of his tendency toward infidelity, but this was not unexpected in the world she came from. Men of power and privilege were understood to have certain freedoms that were simply accepted as part of the bargain of marrying them. What she perhaps did not fully understand at the time was how profound the loneliness would be, how isolated she would feel despite being constantly surrounded by people, how much of herself she would have to suppress in order to maintain the image that his political career required. She entered the marriage with both clarity and naivety. She understood the terms of the bargain intellectually, but she did not yet understand what it would feel like to live those terms day after day, year after year, in the unrelenting spotlight of public attention. When John F. Kennedy became president in 1961, Jacqueline Kennedy became First Lady. And in becoming First Lady, she became something more than simply a woman married to a powerful man. She became an icon. She became a symbol. She became, in the public imagination, the embodiment of a particular vision of American femininity. elegant, cultured, beautiful, and seemingly effortless in her perfection. She approached the role with the same careful attention to detail that she had applied to every other aspect of her public life. She redesigned the White House, transforming it from a somewhat dowdy government building into a showcase of American history and culture. She gave a televised tour of the White House that was watched by millions of Americans, presenting herself as an educator, a curator, someone who understood the importance of preserving and presenting national heritage. She dressed impeccably. Her fashion choices were analyzed and copied. She became a trendsetter, a style icon, someone whose appearance was scrutinized in ways that went far beyond normal public interest. The pillbox hats, the simple, elegant suits, the pearls, these became signatures, elements of an image that was carefully constructed and meticulously maintained. But beneath this image of effortless elegance, there was extraordinary effort. There was constant awareness of being watched. There was the pressure of knowing that every appearance, every outfit, every public statement would be analyzed and judged. There was the exhaustion of constant performance, and there was loneliness, profound, aching loneliness. Despite being surrounded by staff, by Secret Service agents, by political advisors and social secretaries and everyone else who populated the machinery of the White House, she was fundamentally alone. Her husband was consumed by the demands of the presidency. His infidelities continued, perhaps even intensified. He was rarely fully present with her, rarely available for genuine emotional connection. She had her children. Caroline was born in 1957, John Jr. in 1960. They were her refuge, her source of genuine joy, the part of her life that felt real and unperformed. She was fiercely protective of them, determined that they would have some semblance of normal childhood despite the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. But motherhood in the White House was complicated by the constant presence of cameras, by the public's insatiable hunger for images of the perfect first family, by the pressure to present her children as symbols rather than allowing them to simply be children. She began to withdraw, not from her public duties, those she continued to perform with impeccable grace, but from the parts of political life that felt most invasive, most performative, most exhausting. She would escape to the family's compound in Cape Cod or to their farm in Virginia, seeking moments of privacy, moments when she could breathe without being watched. In private, she confided to close friends about the strain of the role, about the difficulty of maintaining the image while feeling increasingly disconnected from any authentic sense of self. She spoke about feeling like she was performing a role in a play, that the character of Jackie Kennedy, First Lady, had become so dominant that she could barely access the person she actually was beneath the performance. The mythology of Camelot, the idea that the Kennedy presidency represented a golden age of American culture and politics, was not something that emerged accidentally. It was constructed deliberately and carefully by a team of image makers who understood that modern political power required not just policy but narrative, not just governance but symbolism. And Jacqueline Kennedy was central to that mythology. She was the Queen of Camelot, the embodiment of grace and culture, the woman who made the White House a center of intellectual and artistic life. She invited artists and writers and musicians to perform. She hosted dinners that brought together the most interesting minds in America. She presented an image of sophistication that elevated the entire presidency. But the burden of being the Queen of Camelot was extraordinary. It meant that she could never simply be human. She could never have a moment of genuine vulnerability in public. She could never express anger or frustration or the deep exhaustion that comes from years of constant performance. She was expected to be perfect, always beautiful, always composed, always gracious, always the ideal of American femininity. Any deviation from this ideal would be seen as a failure, not just of her personally, but of the entire image that had been so carefully constructed. And beneath this pressure, beneath the constant weight of expectation, she was struggling. She was dealing with the pain of her husband's infidelities. She was dealing with the isolation of her position. She was dealing with the exhaustion of constant vigilance. She was dealing with the fundamental human need to be seen and understood by another person. a need that was almost completely unmet in her daily life. She had learned long ago in her childhood that the image you present is more important than the reality you live. She had learned that elegance is a form of armor. She had learned that revealing vulnerability is dangerous. And so she continued to perform. She continued to be exactly what everyone expected her to be, even as the cost of that performance was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. But she was also more than just a performer. She had genuine intelligence. She had genuine taste. She had genuine conviction about the importance of culture and beauty and the preservation of history. Her contributions as First Lady were not simply matters of performance. They were substantive, meaningful, and would have lasting impact on American cultural life. This complexity, the fact that she was both genuinely talented and genuinely trapped, both authentically cultured and authentically performing, is what makes her story so poignant. She was not simply a victim of circumstance. She was an active participant in the construction of her own image. But that participation came at enormous personal cost. And then came Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. The day when everything she had constructed, everything she had performed, everything she had maintained with such careful attention, all of it shattered in a single moment. We have already explored what happened that day, but what we have not fully explored is what it meant for Jackie specifically, what it meant to be sitting beside him, what it meant to witness what she witnessed, what it meant to hold him in those final moments, what it meant to have the most intimate, most traumatic moment of her life occur in full public view. The pink Chanel suit that she wore that day became stained with evidence of the violence. In the hours after the assassination, aides urged her to change, to clean up, to remove the physical evidence of what had occurred, but she refused. "I want them to see what they have done," she said. It was one of the few moments when she allowed her private anguish to become visible, when she refused to perform the role of composed First Lady and instead insisted on presenting the raw truth of what had happened. But even in that moment of refusal, she was still performing. She was using her appearance, the stained suit, as a statement, as a message, as a way of communicating something that words could not capture. She understood, even in the depths of her trauma, the power of image, the power of symbolism, the power of performance. In the days that followed, she orchestrated his funeral with meticulous attention to detail. She studied the funeral of Abraham Lincoln. She planned every element, the procession, the riderless horse, the eternal flame at Arlington Cemetery. She understood that this moment was not just about personal grief, but about national mourning, and that she had a responsibility to shape that mourning in ways that would honor him and provide meaning for a grieving nation. She walked behind his casket with extraordinary dignity. She was composed. She was graceful. She was the image of strength in the face of devastating loss. The nation watched her and saw someone who was bearing unbearable pain with remarkable poise. She became, in that moment, a symbol not just of widowhood, but of resilience, of the human capacity to continue even when continuation seems impossible. But what the nation could not see was the private anguish. What they could not see was the woman who, in private moments, was collapsing under the weight of grief and trauma. What they could not see was the profound loneliness of having experienced something so intimate and so horrific in such a public way, of having the worst moment of your life become a spectacle witnessed by millions. In the months and years after the assassination, Jackie struggled to find a way forward. She left the White House. She tried to establish some kind of normal life for her children. She tried to protect them from the constant attention, the constant intrusion, the constant pressure of being the children of a martyred president. But the attention never ceased. She was one of the most famous women in the world. Everywhere she went, she was photographed. Everything she did was analyzed. She could not go to a restaurant without it becoming news. She could not take her children to the park without being followed by photographers. She moved to New York, hoping that the anonymity of the city would provide some protection. But even in New York, she was constantly recognized, constantly watched, constantly unable to simply exist without being observed. She attempted to find companionship, to find someone who could understand her, who could provide the emotional connection that had been missing from her marriage to Jack. She began a relationship with Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping magnate who was one of the wealthiest men in the world. When she married him in 1968, the public reaction was one of shock and, in many cases, disapproval. How could the Queen of Camelot marry this man? How could she seemingly trade the dignity of her position for wealth and security? But what the public did not understand was that Jackie was making a choice for herself, perhaps for the first time in her life. She was choosing a relationship that offered her protection, security, and the possibility of living outside the constant glare of American attention. Onassis could provide private islands, yachts, places where she could exist without being constantly observed. It was not a romantic choice in the traditional sense. It was a practical choice, a survival choice. A choice made by a woman who had spent years performing for the public and who desperately needed respite. That marriage, too, was complicated. Onassis was difficult, controlling, unfaithful. But he provided what she needed most. Distance from America. Distance from the constant weight of being Jackie Kennedy. Distance from the role she had been forced to play for so long. When Onassis died in 1975, she returned to New York and began the final phase of her life. She took a job as an editor at a publishing house. It was an ordinary job in many ways. The kind of work that allowed her to exercise her intelligence and her taste without requiring constant public performance. She could go to an office. She could work with manuscripts. She could have conversations about books and ideas. She could, for the first time in decades, have something approaching a normal life. What emerged in these later years was a version of Jackie that the public had never quite seen before. She was still elegant. She was still composed. She was still instantly recognizable. But she was also more relaxed, more willing to be simply herself, more willing to move through the world without the constant weight of performance that had characterized her years in the White House. She developed close friendships. She spent time with her children and eventually her grandchildren. She went to the ballet and the theater. She walked through Central Park. She lived as much as someone of her fame could live an ordinary life. But she never forgot what she had experienced. She never forgot Dallas. She never forgot the weight of being watched. She never forgot the cost of being a symbol. In interviews, she was always careful, always controlled, always protective of her privacy and the privacy of her family. She understood that even decades later, people still saw her as Jackie Kennedy, still wanted her to be the Queen of Camelot, still expected her to perform the role that had been assigned to her so many years before. She was protective, particularly of her children's privacy. She fought with photographers who pursued them. She insisted that they be allowed to have lives of their own, separate from the mythology that surrounded their father. She wanted them to be able to make their own choices, to define themselves on their own terms, to not be trapped by the legacy that had trapped her. In 1994, she was diagnosed with cancer. She faced her illness with the same composure that had characterized her approach to every other challenge in her life. She did not make her illness a public spectacle. She did not give interviews about her treatment. She remained to the end protective of her private self. When she died on May 19, 1994, at the age of 64, the public mourning was profound. People who had watched her walk behind her husband's casket, who had seen her as the symbol of grace under pressure, who had admired her elegance and her strength, all of these people grieved her as though they had lost someone they personally knew. But what they were grieving was not quite the real Jackie Kennedy. What they were grieving was the symbol, the image, the carefully constructed performance that she had maintained for so many years. The real Jackie Kennedy, the intelligent, complex, wounded, resilient woman who had lived inside that performance, remained in many ways unknowable. She had protected her private self so carefully for so many years that even in death, that private self remained largely hidden. What Jackie Kennedy's life reveals to us is something profound about the cost of being a symbol. It reveals what it means to live in the constant glare of public attention. It reveals what it means to have your private life become public property. It reveals what it means to be expected to perform strength and grace even when you are experiencing profound pain and trauma. But it also reveals something else. It reveals the power of choosing how you present yourself to the world. It reveals that dignity is not simply something you possess. It is something you construct, something you maintain through conscious choice, something you perform even when the performance is exhausting. Jackie Kennedy understood this better than almost anyone. She understood that in the modern world, image is reality. She understood that how you are perceived shapes how you are treated. She understood that elegance, composure, and grace are not frivolous qualities. They are forms of power, ways of controlling your narrative, ways of insisting on your own dignity, even when the world seems determined to strip it from you. She paid an enormous price for this understanding. She lived a life of profound loneliness. She experienced trauma that would have broken many people. She sacrificed authentic emotional connection for the maintenance of image. She spent decades performing a role that left little room for genuine self-expression, but she also achieved something remarkable. She became a symbol of resilience. She showed millions of people what it looks like to continue in the face of devastating loss. She demonstrated that grace under pressure is not simply a cliché. It is a genuine achievement, something that requires tremendous strength and courage. And perhaps most importantly, she protected her children. She gave them the gift of as much normalcy as someone in her position could provide. She fought for their privacy. She insisted on their right to define themselves on their own terms. She ensured that the cycle of public performance and private suffering would not simply be passed down to the next generation. But who was Jackie Kennedy really? Beneath the performance, beneath the carefully constructed image, beneath the symbol, who was the actual woman? This is the question that has haunted biographers and historians for decades. This is the question that may never be fully answered. Because Jackie Kennedy was so skilled at protecting her private self, because she was so determined to maintain the boundary between public performance and private reality, because she understood so well the importance of controlling her own narrative, she left behind an image that is almost impossible to see through. What we know is that she was intelligent, deeply so. She was well-read, cultured, capable of sophisticated conversation about art and literature and history. She was not simply a decorative presence. She had genuine intellectual substance. We know that she was wounded. The divorce of her parents, the infidelities of her husband, the trauma of Dallas. These were not things that she simply moved past. They were scars that she carried with her, that shaped how she moved through the world, that influenced every choice she made. We know that she was protective, of her children certainly, but also of herself. She understood that revealing too much vulnerability was dangerous, that authenticity could be weaponized against you, that privacy was not simply a luxury, but a necessity for psychological survival. We know that she was lonely. Despite being surrounded by people, despite being one of the most famous women in the world, she was fundamentally isolated. The very performance that protected her also trapped her. The image that gave her power also imprisoned her. And we know that she was resilient. She survived what would have destroyed many people. She found ways to continue. She built a life for herself after tragedy. She insisted on her own dignity even when the world seemed determined to reduce her to a symbol or a spectacle. But beyond these broad strokes, the specific details of who she actually was remain elusive. She left behind letters and interviews and artifacts, but she was always careful in these materials. She was always performing, always aware that what she said would be recorded and analyzed and turned into part of her public image. Perhaps this is as it should be. Perhaps some part of Jackie Kennedy should remain unknowable. Perhaps the private self that she protected so carefully throughout her life deserves to remain protected even now. Jackie Kennedy's life was defined by a fundamental tension. The tension between the public person she was required to be and the private person she actually was. This tension is not unique to her. All of us, to some degree, perform versions of ourselves in public that differ from our private realities. But for Jackie Kennedy, this tension was amplified to an extraordinary degree because of the intensity of the spotlight, the magnitude of the expectations, and the historical significance of the events she lived through. She was expected to be perfect. She was expected to embody an ideal of femininity that was both traditional and modern, both strong and graceful, both public and private. She was expected to carry the grief of a nation while processing her own personal trauma. She was expected to raise her children while being constantly watched. She was expected to maintain her dignity while experiencing profound loneliness. And remarkably, she did all of these things. She performed the role that was demanded of her with extraordinary skill. She became the symbol that people needed her to be. She carried the weight of expectation with remarkable grace. But the cost was enormous. The cost was a life lived largely in performance. The cost was the suppression of authentic self-expression. The cost was profound isolation. The cost was the burden of being a symbol rather than simply being allowed to be a human being. What her life teaches us is something about the price of fame, the burden of expectation, and the importance of protecting some private space where you can simply be yourself. It teaches us that elegance and grace, while admirable, are often constructed at great personal cost. It teaches us that the people we admire from a distance are often carrying burdens we cannot see. If you had been Jacqueline Kennedy, what would you have done? If you had been placed in a position where the entire world was watching you, where every moment of your life was subject to scrutiny and judgment, where you were expected to be perfect even as you experienced profound pain, how would you have responded? Would you have maintained the same level of grace and composure? Would you have insisted on the same boundaries between public performance and private reality? Would you have been able to carry the weight of being a symbol while protecting the vulnerable person within? Or would you have chosen differently? Would you have insisted on more privacy, even if that meant stepping away from the role you were expected to play? Would you have revealed more of your authentic self, even if that meant being vulnerable to judgment and criticism? Would you have refused the burden of being a symbol and insisted on simply being a human being? These are not easy questions. Jackie Kennedy made her choices in a specific historical context, under specific pressures, with specific resources and limitations. We cannot know what we would have done in her position because we have not lived her life, carried her burdens, or experienced her specific challenges. But what we can do is reflect on what her life reveals about the human condition. We can consider what it means to live under constant observation. We can think about the relationship between public performance and private reality. We can examine the cost of being a symbol and the value of protecting some space where we can simply be ourselves. And perhaps most importantly, we can ask ourselves, in our own lives, in our own smaller ways, are we performing versions of ourselves that are disconnected from who we actually are? Are we carrying burdens that others cannot see? Are we maintaining grace and composure at great personal cost? And if so, what might it mean to find ways to be more authentic, more vulnerable, more genuinely ourselves, even in a world that often seems to demand constant performance? These are the questions that Jacqueline Kennedy's life continues to ask us, decades after her death. These are the questions that make her story not simply a historical narrative, but a profoundly human one. A story about all of us, about how we navigate the tension between who we are and who we are expected to be, and about the courage it takes to maintain dignity in the face of extraordinary challenge.